So I probably should have given my intro before or after I hit record. So I'll just say again for people joining us that the idea here is to kind of share what's been working, what challenges we have, and think through some strategies for improving this kind of crazy circus act that we've been doing when we teach in the classroom under social distancing with some students who are remote, right? Whether they're full-time remote or whether they're just cycling in and out of classes. So what I would like you to do to get us started is I put a prompt in the chat. What's something that you're struggling with? Although Anne just had an excellent day. And so if you want to put something that you are winning at, also that would be a fine response to the prompt. But just go ahead and throw in the chat something that you are struggling with or thinking through in the hybrid classroom. And by hybrid, of course, I mean kind of how we've been using it at Center, right? Where you have some students physically present and some students virtually present in the same classroom at the same time. So just go ahead and share things that you're wondering about or struggling with. This means Danielle needs to actually show up at the laptop and not be also making dinner at the same time, at least long enough to type something into the chat. And then, yeah, so if you haven't done a hybrid class, that's cool. You can just learn. So
walking the dog.
Oh, walking the dog. You better type something into the chat.
How do I do
your
that
assignment, man. So yeah, I guess if you're here to learn,
can I get partial credit?
You get extra credit. You get 2 points of extra credit. So yeah, if you're here to learn, then maybe type something that you're curious to learn. How's that? So yeah, Patton's wondering, and I think Anne is also wondering about or struggling with engaging remote students in small group discussions, right? And I totally agree. It seems doable to kind of get them to hear what you're saying in the big class, but to get them interacting with in-person students can be an obstacle. So more of conversational student-to-student discussion versus statement style. Nate, do you want to expand on that just a little bit?
Yeah, so that I was trying to, I mean, to me, it seems like Zoom is, you know, it's like you can pose a question to the students and then students kind of have a statement of what they think on it, but then it's kind of like we don't really go much further than that particular response. Like there isn't that much, you know, then kind of opening it up to the floor. It just seems a lot harder. I mean, it can be hard enough in the classroom already, but it seems like even harder. And so it's like there's a statement that's then given by a student about a particular question, but then to me, it's just a tougher thing to try to pull those other students back in to comment on what one student just said. So
yeah, to get that kind of conversation flowing, which is ideally what you want to have happen. Yeah, good. And then Andrew says group projects with hybrid members. Are there specific barriers that you're finding already, or?
Well, I guess I've got a couple of concerns about it. One of which I think I maybe answered for myself a little bit just now. So I'm just worried about the, frankly, volume in a room of 5 groups of students who are trying to pursue 5 different topics and actually kind of have a substantial discussion among themselves. I just did a very small version of that in my 220, and it didn't go as poorly as I thought it might. And I talked to some students after about whether they thought it was too loud or was viable for like a longer session where you're actually trying to get something done instead of like set your next meeting type of thing. They seemed moderately optimistic that could work, but I'm interested to know, Robin, how your experiment went yesterday.
That wasn't yesterday. That is coming up on Wednesday.
Okay. Well, yeah. I will be interested in the outcome.
I'm thinking about ways to get the the students to do group work, although that's mostly kind of more of a sustained group work as opposed to kind of a think, pair, share. I have almost everybody in person though. So for me, the obstacle there is the distancing as opposed to the incorporating the remote students in. In some ways, it's actually seems easier to me to get a remote student and a in-person student to talk with each other than to get a bunch of 6 foot apart conversations going. But we can kind of dive into that a little bit. And then, so maybe if the conversation is an aspiration, getting that really, I always think about it like I'm throwing a ball and I throw the ball to the student throws the ball back to me. It's really nice to get the students throwing the balls to each other, that conversational ball to each other, right? And so obviously that's the aspiration, but sometimes, yeah, even just that simple exchange of me and the student, like Anne kind of points out in the comments, can be tough, right? Getting the remote students in to ask and answer questions, right? Danielle says outside will help when weather warms up for that kind of in-person group work. I think that's absolutely right. Although maybe tougher for any sort of larger discussion that's hybrid, right? With the virtual and the in-person students. All right, so we have 3 students who I'm about to let into the waiting room. So let me just go ahead and they can share their experiences. Hello, welcome students. Thank you so much for being willing to help out some faculty, especially faculty who are thinking about how to make this kind of weird conglomeration of some students physically in the classroom and some students attending virtually, how to make this work better for everybody. And so I invited some students who I know have been learning, at least a block of learning only remotely, because I thought they would have lots of experiences to draw on of being in hybrid classes. And so I thought maybe first the students could just introduce themselves and let us know who they are, what they're majoring or thinking of majoring in, and maybe anything else that they want to share about maybe where they are, because some of them are on campus and some of them aren't. So yeah, I'll just turn it over first to Lucas.
Hello, my name is Lucas Williamson. I'm a current junior. I'm a double major in behavioral neuroscience and computer science with a minor in linguistics. I was remote for block 1 of the fall, and I've been on campus for the rest of that, but I did take a lab course while I was remote, and that had its own difficulties. So I'm planning on talking about that specifically.
Awesome, Lucas, thank you. Michelle, let's toss it to you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Michelle Chan. Hi, Dr. Meisner. I am a sophomore. I am working towards being a theater major. I am coming from Boston, Massachusetts right now, so around 1,000 miles away. And I am a Posse Scholar, part of Center Posse 14.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Michelle. And then finally, Bailey.
Hi, I'm Bailey Talk. I am a junior with ENS and double majoring in ENS and classics. I've been remote for both the fall center term and the spring. And I'm only like an hour and a half away from Naples.
Okay, yeah, because I can see that beautiful blue sky that I'm looking at my window here too. Great. So yeah, the goal is, even if you recognize some professors who are here, the idea is just kind of share broadly, right? Nobody's going to dig into a particular professor or experience, unless you want to. But I think the idea here is to share maybe some obstacles that you have faced when you've attended. And again, sort of specifically thinking about hybrid classes, although, if there are other things you want to talk about, that's cool. And so that's the first question. And then the second question will be, what are some things that professors have done or some strategies in general that have helped you feel connected to the class, helped you learn in your classes? And then maybe we'll see if anyone else has any questions. So let's start out with any obstacles or barriers that you've encountered. And really anybody can start, or I can call on somebody if no one leaps into the fray?
I can go.
Thanks.
Okay, so yeah, just a couple of challenges. Perhaps obviously, it can be really hard to hear what others are saying during class discussions. I definitely had moments where I would just pretend to know where the conversation was going, or I just gave up on trying to follow everything. In my experience, these usually were less important topics, like maybe it was just like a little bit of like casual conversation that the professor was having with the student on the side during a break, which obviously isn't a big deal. But even for some of those less important conversations, it added like layer of confusion that certainly isn't there for in-person students.
Mm-hmm. Do you have other ones to share, or do you want to?
I had one more that kind of was going to that. And so this, I mean, obviously, perhaps you can, it's pretty clear to extend this to participating in student activities. Sorry, I just got the phone. Student activities like study groups are even more difficult.
You're popular.
Yeah, so for my lab course, I would attend the study group sessions prior to exams, but I probably understood only about 40 to 60% of what was being said at any time. This wasn't a huge issue for me, but I could see this being very isolating for younger students or those who might be struggling with the content.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, that's what I had for my two major obstacles.
Yeah, so just kind of be just hearing, right? So then you're kind of already cognitively, you got that, well, you could probably tell me cognitively, right? You're already struggling to actually just hear the words, and then also maybe thinking about the material adds another layer. Okay, well, thanks. Let's see, Michelle or Bailey, do you want to build on that or offer your own ideas about obstacles or barriers?
I'll build on that because a lot of my classes are discussion based, or some of them at least this semester. They were more last semester. But especially when I can't hear, it's very difficult and it makes me very unwilling to participate because I don't want to repeat something that someone else has already said. So I might have new thoughts, I might have old thoughts, but I just don't feel comfortable sharing because I don't want to seem redundant, and that's difficult as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that totally makes sense, right? I sometimes experience that these days in Zoom meetings when I haven't necessarily been paying a full attention, and then I'm like, oh, has this already been said? And then I just kind of sit back and don't say it. So I can sympathize with that. How about you, Michelle?
Yeah, definitely not being in the same room as these conversations. It just makes it harder to build these relationships with my classmates. It's a little easier with my professor since I can go to office hours and everything, but I'm not in the same class as my peers. So when it comes to like group projects and everything, I'm just kind of like added on to the end of one of the groups just so that I can be included. So that's been a little bit hard. And so it also takes away like that kind of like support system that you get. Like you're not up like at 12 a.m. studying in the library with them or having like the same issues as they are. And then another problem, at least specifically for me, because I'm staying home to help support my family, both like emotionally and financially. So being able to focus on school is a lot harder compared to when I was on campus, because when I was on campus, I was just worried about my classes, taking care of myself, doing my own laundry, doing my own dishes, worrying about what I had to eat. But at home, it's a lot harder, especially since I also have a job. So I think it's made class a lot easier to like have one-on-one time with my professor and kind of talk to them about what I'm going through and make sure they know and be able to communicate with them about my certain specific situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think that's a really good point about kind of the assumptions that we're maybe used to making about students when they're on campus, right? They're on campus, they can walk to the library, they have a certain amount of time to devote. That might not be true when students are learning remotely. But our brains are still maybe in the old mode. But then I think you also help us pivot a little bit to things that have helped. So maybe do you want to kind of expand on that, because you mentioned kind of professors one-on-one, that's something that's useful to you. Are there other things that you've seen professors do or classes do that have been really helpful?
I've personally done a lot better with classes that are like completely synchronous. Like if professors post an hour-long lecture that we should be watching outside of class, it's really easy for me to fall behind because I'm like, oh, I can put that off. Let me just focus on this next class that I have to attend and be present for. So it's a lot easier for me to like get behind, and obviously without the support system of both my peers and being a little bit disconnected from my professor, it's hard to like have the courage to ask for help.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Other strategies from students that you found, your professors or your classes, that have been helpful in overcoming some of those barriers?
I found that when a professor, like if they're asking for discussion from the class or a question, it's very helpful if they repeat that question back. Just, I think it helps in person and for people who are on Zoom, because one, you can hear if you're on Zoom, but two, getting that extra reinforcement is very, very helpful.
Mhm,
It's
great.
also helpful when a professor will say, you can say this, or you can interrupt if you don't get something. Because you're a little bit tentative, and if you have a question, you don't necessarily want to say that you have a question because you feel like you're a little behind your classmates that are in person.
Mhm. So that extra reinforcement, I like that extra invitation is helpful.
Very
Great.
much so.
Thanks. Lucas, any strategies that you found helpful in block one?
Right. I just want to quickly build on what Bailey just said.
Yeah.
I can't stress how important it is enough to repeat like any questions or comments that are made, because when that's not being repeated and kind of going off of what my big challenge was with not being able to hear people, if I couldn't hear people, that was essentially my cue to just like not pay attention, because I couldn't. But moving on to other things that I found very helpful. Specifically, I don't know if there are any laboratory professors in here, but being flexible with lab assignments was really essential, for especially not only just being remote, but also being in the weird block schedule, taking a lab course. My professor, I'm not going to go into the whole story unless if Dr. Cutright wants me to, but my professor essentially mailed me a large amount of lab supplies, which I later returned to campus, and was very flexible with due dates when there were mailing issues. I'm very grateful for her willingness to work with me, to account just for the strangeness of that. Another helpful strategy for labs, and obviously this only works for hybrid, and it probably would work for really any class. It doesn't have to be a lab course, but pairing me with in-person students to help conduct the lab assignments. This was important in labs in which she couldn't only the supplies. And so sometimes it was difficult to coordinate with my in-person peers, but I still found that to be a whole lot more engaging than simply substituting a virtual simulation, instead of like whatever the activity they were doing.
So you felt kind of more included, like you were learning the same kinds of things, or able to kind of see what everyone else was doing rather than off in your own virtual world?
Right. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah. All right, thanks. So I'm going to let the other faculty here ask any questions that they have or follow up on anything that any of the students have said. Or Michelle, you want to add something? Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one other helpful thing for me. I thought whenever there would sometimes be classes where we would all be on Zoom for one day, especially when it came to discussions. So that kind of like leveled out the playing field for me. Or if the discussions were on Moodle as a discussion board, it made me feel like I wouldn't lose what one of my peers said, or wouldn't have to like repeat or be redundant, as Bailey said.
So it gave you kind of the level playing field for some of those discussions. All right, so professors, does anybody have any questions or want to follow up on any piece of what the students shared?
Following up on what Michelle had said, I'm wondering how many of your classes, and this goes to the faculty too, you have all the students, even the in-person ones, on their laptops, because I generally don't have my in-class students on laptops because I can't tell if they're surfing the web or whatever. And you know, if it would work better somehow if everybody was on Zoom while I'm doing the PowerPoint and asking questions, then I'd consider doing that. But I don't know.
Have any of you experienced that where you have students in the classroom on Zoom? I know there's some obstacles to making that work right, just technologically, but have any of you been in a class where that's been pulled off, or otherwise have in-class students who are also with you on Zoom?
I think for one of my other course that wasn't a lab course, there were a few classes where everyone was on Zoom and it was easier to follow, I think.
And they were on Zoom from the classroom rather than on Zoom in their dorms or wherever on campus?
Oh, I don't think they're on Zoom in the classroom. Was that what the question was?
Yeah, she was thinking if all the students were on Zoom but at their laptops, then the remote everybody could see everybody's faces just on the Zoom screen, even though some of those students would be in person in the classroom at the same time.
I see, yeah, Michelle, I thought you were referring to people who were in the room, but also Zooming with you, but that was when the professor was saying everybody meet, you know, be in their own little space and meet.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's that. And then I've also had one experience where the in-person students were in person but also had laptops. But the only reason they did was so they could all we could all be doing an interactive thing on our laptops while being on Zoom. And then there was some like audio issue where like you should be on Zoom or else like there would be a horrible feedback or something like that. But being on the laptop and having something that we were supposed to interact with, I think helped my professor to know that we were like participating and paying attention.
And that's where breakout rooms come in.
Yeah, and Danielle says she does that when we're all outside too. When everybody's outside, that might deal with some of the crazy sound echo issues. Other questions for the students from professors? Yeah, Patton.
So I haven't actually done a hybrid class. I've been lucky that my class right now, they're all in person. And so, but I'm sure that at some point someone's not going to be there. And so I was thinking about trying to include that person, you know, whoever that was, more physically in the classroom by having the Zoom show up on the big screen. And was wondering if students would feel like that was super weird, or you know, how that would make you feel. Because even when I'm staring at my students over Zoom, you know, often we don't have the most like pleasant expression on our face when we're just watching, you know, other people, and sometimes a few students are falling asleep. And so I just kind of wondered about like putting you know, if that was a privacy issue, you know, that now you don't get to see the other students, but they're all watching you do whatever it is that you're doing. And was just curious what your all's thoughts were about whether that was more inclusive or just like super weird.
Bailey, you want to take that one?
I had a class that did this last fall, and it was really, really weird to know that everybody was just watching my face and everyone else who was online's face on the big screen while everyone was looking. And I know I did not always have the best expression on my face, as you said, but I think it is also very helpful because, like, if I'm on a little computer, like just in front of you, and I raise my hand, you probably aren't going to see me because you're looking at, oh, the PowerPoint, or oh, all the other students. And I think that if I or other remote students are in the big screen, even if you don't see me, someone else in class will, and will say, oh, Bailey has her hand raised. And that would be very, very helpful.
That makes sense. Anything else? Lucas, do you want to follow up on that?
Right. I see where that's coming from. I've been on both sides of this. So I've been in both a class where I have been the person on the screen and in a class where I look at the people on the screen. And I guess from that perspective, obviously I was the person on the big screen first because I was remote for block one. There was a little bit of weirdness of it, but at least for me, I got over it pretty quickly. And I think that a helpful thing was that my professor, I think, had us on there to start and then would like have a lecture presentation on top of it. So like you'll only be showing our faces for like the first bit. And obviously that makes it harder for the students to catch a hand going in the air, but that can like it can still like build that sense of community by just revealing everyone's face at the start of class while preventing people from being too weirded out about it. And then from the other side, like I'm in a math class right now. My professor does that. And like most of the people just have their camera off anyways. And it's really, I mean, I don't think anyone pays attention to them at all. I mean, the professor obviously does, but no one in person is like staring at their video feed. If it's on, they're all paying attention to the lecture.
Well, that's heartening, I guess, to hear.
I just wanted to say, maybe you students don't realize that, of course, as instructors, when you're in front of all of you, we see all your listening faces. And so we're very familiar with the different sorts of expressions that some students have. And some are very visual, and that's helpful. And then others, you're not sure what they're thinking.
So Anne's point is that this whole like seeing everybody on little squares listening feels maybe weird to people who are used to being on one side of the room, but we're kind of used to seeing a whole gallery of faces from up in the front, and it feels okay. Yeah, I did have a student who was, I have a remote student right now, just one, and the first day I had him up there and then he could see himself. Like he could see how big his face was on the screen from the camera that was showing me. And so he was like, can you make that not happen? Because he felt really uncomfortable, right? Feeling like he was like this giant like face looming. But we reached a compromise where his face is now smaller, but it's still up there, because I do kind of want people to, you know, for the reasons that you point out, be able to see that he has his hand up, or, you know, I want to make sure that I can see his face if he's looking like, what are you talking about? I want to be able to catch that. But yeah, it's now a normal sized human head and not a giant screen, which I feel like, and I moved it out of the camera so he can't see himself, which I think would be really distracting. So yeah. Okay. Well, I told the students that I would let them go at 4:30. Does anybody have a final word that they want to share? Anything that we've missed? Any student? Or Nate, do you have a real quick question for them?
Yeah, I just have a real quick question. So it sounds like the hearing other students is an issue, and it seems like most of the cameras that we have tend to have more of like a unidirectional microphone that's being pointed at the professor. Is there a chance that we could actually get like a multi-directional microphone that would actually be a separate, I mean, I know that those are probably really expensive, but would that actually help facilitate better conversations? Because then you could actually hear things going on in the room, or would that just create chaos because then you're hearing everybody in the room?
You're hearing everybody chewing on whatever,
right, or like
their mask,
yeah, or something.
Yeah, well, I think that might be a question. I don't know if any students have experienced that. Otherwise, that might be a question that we can talk about as classroom tech experts later. I don't know if any of you have any setup that works really well in any of your classes. Yeah, Michelle.
I had an experience during the fall where I was kind of like put on an iPad, and I would have like a buddy every single day. And if I had a question, I would just type it into the chat, and then my buddy would feel like the vibration and then be able to ask the teacher to answer that question. So that kind of worked for me.
Okay. Yeah, so you kind of had your own like human microphone partner in the class, and then your physical presence as the tablet rather than on the screen. That's cool. All right. Well, thank you so much. This is honestly, this is one thing that I really love about center students, is that you're willing to come to talk to faculty about your experiences in a way that, you know, I think is super helpful for us, but, you know, just another day in the life of a student, telling your faculty what we've done that hasn't worked and what we've done that has. So I really do appreciate you sharing your experiences with us, and that's going to help us do better, hopefully. So thank you so much, and I will hopefully see you all later sometime. All right, man, I love our students. So what were the big takeaways, or what kind of strikes us, or do we want to kind of lift out of what we heard from the students for discussion?
Bailey heard nothing in my class in the fall and hated having her head projected on the screen.
Yeah, I know. I feel bad because I don't want them to have to like be critical of their professors, but yet I know that they have had some of you. So
yeah, you know, I mean, the thing that's tough is that there's nothing I would do differently. Do you know what I mean? And so that's kind of what's hard. Like, it's good to hear that, and you know, I think but I think that's sort of what's hard, right? Like I guess I feel like for me, the only thing which I already do, but I will be even more attentive to doing, is to make sure I repeat whatever's said. But I don't know there's anything. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be grouchy. I just, you know, like, there's just that wall you hit of like, I'm not sure that there's much else I could do, you know, without the boom operator, which is I'm now obsessed with. But
without the boom operator, well, right, it's a frustrating situation. It's not anybody's ideal necessarily, right? I think one thing I took away from that, and I'm curious to hear what you all take away, but I wonder if just saying to the remote students, like, I understand you might be experiencing these things, could even help them, right? Like, maybe there's nothing you can do, but maybe you can at least acknowledge and commiserate and open the door to talking about what the frustrations are, even if we don't yet have our own boom operator who follows us around, you know, like that might be at least something to take away from a situation that might be something that we can't fix, right? But at least to acknowledge and have a conversation about that with the student could be helpful. I don't know. Does anybody else have something to respond to Danielle, or to kind of lift out that you learned from hearing the students' experience? Yeah, Nate?
I was just going to ask you all if you have felt like you have shifted a little bit more toward just going more into lecture mode because of all of these major changes, where you maybe had different things where you used to pause for different types of participation, but you just know that it's not really going to work anyway. And so you're just kind of, you know, going forward into just kind of professor teacher mode. I don't know if anybody else has felt that way, but that's been weighing a little bit on my mind lately, is that, am I becoming too much of like the, you know, the just lecturing, and, you know, just being too concerned that it's going to mess things up trying to facilitate discussion.
That's definitely the issue that I've been going in, because the last number of years I've been trying harder to have them do little think, pair, share things and so on, and I've been feeling pretty good about it and seeing where they can work well in my lectures, and it seems just too complicated to do that. However, I think it was on Tuesday, I said, you know, I usually do this, you know, ask students to talk about it and then answer the clicker question, you know. And I said, I'm not sure if that would work, but one of the students said, oh yeah, we can do this. I mean, they're all distanced, right? And I thought they'd be shouting at each other. But I put all the people that were on Zoom, normally I had the chat set only to respond to me for the answers to their clicker questions, but I changed it so they could talk with each other. And then the people in the room did that, and, you know, they wanted to do it. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, I guess. And you know, I think it's better than not doing it at all, is what I've decided, even if it's not perfect.
Yeah, I've also found that I can definitely do like a think, pair, share. They can hear each other. It's not overly loud to do it. if it's not, if it's just kind of check in with your neighbor about this, or, those kinds of shorter, more informal prompts. Other experiences, either to kind of back up Nate's observation about just kind of, well, I know I can tell them this, and so I'm not sure if this other thing is going to work, or the barriers are high, so I'm going to kind of, resort to lecture mode, or who have found good ways to do more participatory or kind of group-based work in the hybrid class. What are your other experiences on this question?
I was wondering, so I'll also admit that today was the very first day that I set foot in the classroom since March, and it was really fun. And I was really scared. And as I said, I didn't have any students remote, so it was like as normal as you could get, and it was really fun, and I'm glad I did it. But I was thinking about trying to set up, trying to go back and forth between Zoom and in person, and trying to just kind of mess around with my calendar a little bit so that I had stuff that would work, better in each environment. But that was one thing when I asked my students at the very beginning, I said, was there anything a professor did that drove you crazy, in the past, in the blocks or in center term? And one was like, oh, I hated that, like, they went back and forth, sometimes we were in person, sometimes we were in Zoom. And so I'm just like, maybe, it was just one student, right? So like, you don't know what to do with that. But I was wondering, I guess I was just thinking that maybe that could help solve some of this, that like, if I just, instead of spending half the, like having 2 activities in one day, maybe I could just do it all, do like one activity in one day, and then kind of another thing in another day, and kind of set it up differently, so that I could leverage whatever environment we were in better.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to think about it, as leveraging the strengths of the different modes, if you can, right? If you have things that work well on Zoom and things that would work well in the class, or give them a chance to be in the class, to use those intentionally, right? We haven't had much intention in our ability to choose our teaching style for the last year, but I do think that that's a really good way to think about it when you can, to intentionally choose the platform that works better when you can. Other experiences with group work, other successes and challenges that you've experienced, Kiana?
So I actually have more of a question than a comment. So I have been teaching fully remote, although I did use the tents in the fall, and that worked really well. But so my question is, when I use small groups all the time on Zoom when I'm fully remote, and it works really well. And also when I'm lecturing, I'm constantly going back and forth between my slides and the room, just to keep the students engaged and check in with them. But when you have some students who are remote and some who are in person, and you want to do small groups, how does that work without just telling everybody to get in a Zoom room? Like, I really don't even know how that is supposed to work. So can someone say more about that? And if you already talked about it, I'm sorry, I came in.
No, that's okay. All we did before you came was share what we were worried about in our own teaching, and then we invited the students in. So I'm realizing that there's actually more people kind of here to learn about the hybrid than who have been doing it a lot. So first of all, I think I would love to hear from anybody. So maybe Nate's been doing it more, maybe Katie, I'm not sure what you've been doing, maybe Danielle, who have done more iterations of group work. What's been working? How have you been doing that?
Yeah, so this is something I know Anne had asked about when I was out walking the dog. I was my charger at school, so it kind of set me back on my schedule. But I did lift the computer ban, and what I've been doing is, most of the kids have their computers. I have something that says, if you have a laptop or a tablet, bring it. If you don't, no problem. It's not a big deal, because I have CTL's iPad, I've got the in-class computer, and then I have my personal laptop. And then when I do group work, I will have the kids log on to Zoom and be like, okay, you're Fred's partner. And then I have Google Docs set up that they work together on. So that kind of helps the in-person person and the online person, have something to record what they're doing, or Jamboard works really well, for that as well. And that worked pretty well. And that was another way to get the students to talk to each other across that kind of divide. And so I think that I haven't gotten any pushback about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I can add on to that. So I've done a lot of group work with kind of dealing with various numbers online versus in the classroom. So for instance, in the fall, when I had just a couple of students online, I did it kind of what Danielle was just talking about, that process of like pairing them up. This week was my first week hybrid, and I had like 10 to 12 online. So I don't know if this was the best way, but I just made 2 breakout rooms and didn't have folks in the classroom do it. But then kind of the question I posed earlier was, I felt like their process online for Zoom folks just ended up taking so much longer. So then I ran into the logistical issue of, would it have been better to just kind of sprinkle them throughout the classroom, because then all the groups, the process would end up working a little better. So that's kind of a question I have as well about how best to go about that.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that I have, I haven't taught hybrid before this semester, so I have limited experience. And I have one remote student who told me at 10 p.m. the night before classes started. That's not what CenterNet said, but that's what he said. So I was like, oh, great. But so some of the times that we've had group work, there's been someone else on Zoom. Because they're on a team traveling somewhere, or because they're in their dorm. And then I do default to having the people on Zoom work together and the people in the classroom work together. But those were more sort of think, pair, share, not super long. And because it was different students all the time, I think if it was the same 2 students, I mean, I guess that's who they talk to. They talk to their neighbor, and it ends up being the same, especially now that I can't shuffle them around quite as easily. But I have just done, a partner in your mode. But I have also done what Danielle said, and had a student. Most of my students have their laptops, and so I've also relaxed that. And I've just had somebody connect and be the remote student's partner. I haven't done anything that would take a longer process yet, though. So yeah, I can see where you would kind of, things take longer on Zoom, right? So the equivalency starts to break down. Nate, did you want to add in?
Yeah, I was just going to add that I've been running hybrid classes, and each of my I'm teaching 3 classes, and they're all full of 30 students. So I've been running A group and B group, and doing the A group and B group, zooming in on the opposite days. And what I've actually found to avoid the chaos is to just kind of have so we'll do an A group on the Monday section, and B group on the Wednesday section, and then on the Friday section, everybody zooms in. And to me, it's easier on the everybody zooming in day to do the more discussion-based things, because then everybody's there, and then I'm not trying to go like back and forth between 2 things. So I guess in a way, students are getting, I'll still do participation, but it's mainly geared toward the students that are in that class that day. And so I guess students are getting like 2 out of the 3 days that they can kind of participate and engage in it. But they're not getting the one day that they're a little bit more like an observer within the classroom. They can still ask questions and everything, and they come through on the to ask the questions. But that's just kind of the compromise that I've come up with over time, but it isn't perfect.
Like so much of the pandemic, right? It's not quite perfect, but we're trying to make it work. Yeah, Anne.
I just was, for those of you that are now letting them bring their laptops in so that they can do some interactive things. I guess if if they're all on their laptops and they don't have the sound on, they're just communicating through the chat, right? Is that right? So that you don't get feedback issues? I mean,
So when I have them outside, I do, it takes a little coaching, but I do like a mute, unmute. Because when you're outside, there's no, the sound is horrible because there's no walls. And so it takes a little coaching, but I'll be like, Fred, unmute and make your comment. So they have Fred's got his laptop in his lap, he's on Zoom. And then when he speaks, he unmutes himself and talks. And then, you know, the nice thing is that the feedback, I mean, it's sort of like a shock collar, you know, people, they pick up on pretty quickly that if they don't mute themselves, it's going to be ugly. So it takes a little bit of coaching, but I thought, you know, it worked okay. So you always have, you know, if you're in a classroom, there's sound from you, but if you're running a discussion, what you might do is yourself talk really loud, mute your computer, and then have the students unmute when they talk, because they'll probably hear you because you're probably really good at projecting, and then it's the students they can't hear. I don't know.
I see that Katie said that worked when there were just a few students in the classroom. And Christy asks if they're using headphones.
No. Yeah.
I have just had them use their computers in case they need to be the partner of the remote student. And because I've moved a lot of, so I moved, you know, any handouts are now, I post on the Moodle page, like class activities, usually to a Google Doc that has anything that I want people to look at or interact with, where I might normally have made a worksheet. That's all on Google. And, you know, the other day I had them annotate something, and so they worked in partners, so the remote students and the in-person students, they were all annotating the same Google Doc with their partner, and then we were looking at that to have a conversation about the pieces that they picked out. So I've been using the laptops less as having the students in the classroom aren't necessarily on Zoom, but it gives us a common place where everybody's interacting with visuals, things that would be handouts, things that would be worksheets or activities. And they're using their laptops or tablets to access those from the classroom.
So you would open up the Google Docs thing and then share that on your computer while you're in Zoom so that they'd all see it?
No, I have it as a link on the Moodle page. So I say, okay, we're going to do an activity. We have the, 3 short articles that we read for yesterday, and, click on this link in the Moodle page under the day to find the activity. And I want this group to look at article A and this group to look at article B, and then they go in there and they add. So I just have that already set up. I don't share it in the Zoom link because it's on the Moodle page that they can all access. You could, if they were all in Zoom, do that, right? But
yeah, you could put it in the chat box I placed when we've done shared Google Docs. I had a question for Danielle. So when you were talking about having all the students on their laptops, were you're talking about when you were in the classroom and not in the tent? Because I was just thinking about internet the reception out in the tents when you're outdoors. And so my understanding is that we couldn't rely on students to have internet access under the tents. Is that still the case?
Depends on the location of the tent.
Okay.
Depends on the location of the tent. Sounds like Danielle had luck with that.
Yeah, no, it was fine. Yeah, so Kiana, when you and I were seeing each other, that's what I was doing.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. Okay, so
yeah, and it worked pretty good. And then I had a and then we were right in front of crowds. I never had a tent that was near Grant or but anywhere in front of crowds worked pretty well.
Okay, thanks.
So I want to kind of do some things to close as we get closer to 5. And then if anyone wants to stick around and talk more, they can. So I'm going to, in the chat, I just put a link to a YouTube video that I made back in the fall with some reading that I had done about this now I've done it in person, right? So I realized that I probably sounded really way too confident about how awesome all this could be. I think the reading and just the conversations that I've had, not just at Center, but at other ACS colleagues, this is like the hardest way to teach, because you're trying to focus on so many different things at once, right? You have a lot of different inputs, and it's hard to juggle everything. And then you're doing it in masks too, right? The video, just to kind of bring up a couple of points, basically suggests that one way to think about things is to try to make equivalent what the remote and the in-person students are doing as much as possible. So rather than have a handout for the students in class and a scan of that handout for the remote students, like now I've moved to having everything on Google Docs, right? Just sort of try to make equivalent their experiences as much as possible with the group work or with the way that they're accessing things. And you know, just to call on the remote student when their hand is up, or when, you know, it's time to call on them. Although I found myself using chat a little bit more to interact with that person. I have the Zoom on a laptop in front of me, so I can see the chat right here, and then that's what's being projected. But just to kind of try to include that student, look at the camera when I'm looking around at everybody in the room, look at the camera as if it's another student. That's something that Tara said that really resonated with me, so that student feels seen. That's something that I heard from the students who talked to us, that kind of feeling seen and heard can be a struggle, as also seeing and hearing, right? And creating that extra layer of remove that kind of almost invites them to disengage, because if they can't hear and no one can see them, they become more of a sort of a removed spectator. So trying to remember to see and hear them and draw them in. The video also suggests maybe there are some ways in which you can treat their participation differently, but that takes advantage of the mode that they're in, right? So maybe if you have a class fact checker, maybe the remote student can be the fact checker because they're at their computer, and they could even share their screen if they find an awesome meme or a relevant map or something like that, right? And because they're set up to do that in a way that the students in class aren't. Or maybe you know, maybe you make groups and they have to do something between remote students and in-person students, but then when they report back out, the remote student is the reporter, and they share the thing that they've made together, or the answer to the problem or something, by sharing their screen. So they have a slightly different role, but you can kind of maximize what they can do versus what the in-person students can do to kind of play to their strengths. So that's another way to potentially think about it. And then, yeah, I think that it sounded like from the students that anything you can do to make them feel included and part of the conversation, whether that's one-on-one or the way that you set things up, I think is really helpful. So Danielle's heading out. I do have one last little interactive activity here, which is a Jamboard link. So I'm going to post that in the chat. It's too bad Danielle is not here for the Jamboard, but because she's made some awesome Jamboards for meetings that we've had. But I've just posted a Jamboard link with a question to kind of help you reflect. So if you go to that link, you should see a question. What's one thing you might apply from this discussion to your own classes? So if you've used Jamboard before, go ahead and add a post-it just as a way to kind of add a reflection or end with a reflection. If you haven't used Jamboard before, you see a left-hand sidebar, and you see about in the middle, there's a little square that's a sticky note. And so you click on that, and then you write your thing in your sticky note. And then when you click back on the main screen, that sticky note will go onto the screen, and then you can move it around and put it somewhere. So this is like our whiteboard where we're adding our final thought. So let's kind of take a second for people to put something that you might apply if you do teach in a hybrid mode, or maybe on Friday, like I will, my next class. Yeah, make sure everyone can hear your conversations, repeat in class questions. Yeah, I feel like I need to keep reminding myself to do that. I think that I do, but I don't always repeat them verbatim. I think I just weave them in. And I think I maybe need to do a little bit more explicit repeating. Using Google Docs, using other pieces of technology to help those remote students come in. Look at the camera, man. Yeah, treat the camera tripod like it's another student in the class. As you look around, look at that. I feel like I look at the screen or I look at my computer and I'm never quite looking directly at the student, and that's an easy one to fix. And then don't be afraid. So those will be my final words in the recording at 4:59 p.m. Don't be afraid. It's not perfect, but we can do it. So thank you all for being here. I'm going to shut off recording. Have a good night. And I'm also around to answer any questions that anyone wants to stick around and ask. So thank you all.